Hey guys, today I wanted to talk a little bit about East versus West and the comic book divide. Yeah, this is one heck of a topic to cover, but let me start off by clearing up a few things. I truly do love both art forms, and while I've always been a manga reader and have preferred the Eastern styles of comics over the Western, this is not a video arguing which of the two is better. I'm approaching this topic as one who lives in the West and truly loves this medium of storytelling, which, although different in many ways, is still fundamentally the same thing. Manga are comic books, and even if you don't live in Japan, the comics that you read are technically manga. Now, before you get mad, I know what you're thinking. Manga is specifically referring to Japanese comics, and you would be right. However, in Japanese, manga refers to all kinds of cartooning and comics. It's only amongst us English speakers that manga has the stricter meaning of Japanese comics. We can easily parallel this to the usage of anime in and outside Japan. Anime in short for animation. Disney movies are literally Disney anime, but it's not what the typical Westerner would perceive as anime when we hear the word thrown around. The point is, the term manga is used in Japan to refer to both comics and cartooning. Outside of Japan, the word is typically used to refer to comics originally published in the country. Now, why do I prefer Eastern manga as opposed to Western in the first place? That's where we get to the real key differences between the two. It's all about the way the story is told. The author having control versus the publisher having control of the characters and the story. I just want to have one linear narrative. Manga is like reading the unadulterated work of the author in its purest form. When I read Jujutsu Kaisen or Vagabond, I feel like I'm really being told the story directly from the mind of the author, him or herself. No middleman, no director or producer, just me and the narrative. This is a deeply personal space that, if done right, will mean something great to the reader. Take Western comics, for example. We've had some crazy amount of Spider-Man comics over the years, a heck ton of writers, some good, some bad. And then here we are in 2022, when Peter Parker should be a grown man bearded with children, but the whole universe gets rebooted at some point. So, inevitably, we're back to ground one, baby. College applications. Western comics have failed to give us an ending. Now, you could be saying, well, there are hundreds of manga that are still ongoing and have never reached an end, but that's not really the end I'm talking about. I more don't want these stories changing hands again and again and again without any new stories coming up. While I do think there are certain situations in which having comic books written by multiple different writers and that are ongoing like that do work and they do create great stories, I don't think I would have had the same impact from Naruto if 5 years later, after it ended, you had a new creative that licensed the series and is now in charge of writing a completely alternative set of events. It wouldn't have been the same thing. But when you look at Marvel comics and when you look at the major comics of the West, that's what you're constantly getting. You're getting that with Spider-Man, you're getting that with the X-Men. It's constantly a new update, new reboot, never actually continuing down one path. So you tend to like certain comic runs or certain authors and illustrators that have worked on a particular comic, but how many of you have actually read every single Spider-Man from day one? And how many of those stories have continued past? How many stories do we have dealing in the era of Spider-Man's grandchildren, which we should be at by now? Come on. I have noticed some of DC doing things like this. You have Superman's son and Batman's son, Damian Wayne, and they have their comic runs where they are kind of taking this concept, and that is one change that I definitely like. But DC has a history of rebooting their stuff, so I take it with a grain of salt, and I don't know when their stories will end up following the same treatment of new runs and new runs and new runs without any real conclusion to them. Another thing that I tend to dislike is the West's lack of genre. While I don't expect our parents to be reading Doki Doki Literature Club comic books and slice of life romance, I do think that it would renew interest in the stories if they weren't always superheroes. We've made progress in the superhero genre. Ironies like The Boys and Invincible do exist. However, I'm talking about completely different stories altogether. Where's our Clannad and Berserk and Vagabond and Jobless Reincarnation? Surely there are writers out there that have something other than Superman or Batman to fill the gap. And while these superhero stories tend to be the most prolific comic book works, or not even to say that, the most well-known comic books in the West, the West effectively has one genre, and by this I mean our only mainstream comics are about superheroes. Now, you will get some great comic publishing companies out there that aren't DC Comics or Marvel Comics. There's Dark Horse, Valiant, and there are a bunch of others, but they just don't get the same light of day as MCU or DC, who have pretty much taken hold of Western comics, but they're failing right now, and they're not doing justice to the stories that they have. I have manga ideas, and there are many talented storytellers and artists out there that dream of writing, creating, and producing manga of their own. Why don't they? Better yet, where are they? Well, the question you should be asking is, where's the demand? This is another one of the fundamental problems I see in our comic book culture. We still look at it like a child's pastime. Albeit we've made some improvements. As the teenagers of yesterday slowly become adults, our generation tends to keep these cultural artifacts of our childhood alive. Manga is still somewhat looked over here as things for kids. Compare this to Japan, where your average citizen is walking to work reading the latest One Piece, when your boss knows Naruto. It's a whole different social climate, one that breeds comic books, authors, and has the ability to sustain them as a profession. One may think, hey, let me just write an awesome idea that nobody's ever heard of and get it popping in Japan. But let's be honest, this is a very slim chance of happening. There are millions of writers in Japan with brilliant stories that will never get the light of day. So publishers are not going to take the time and money translating and working with foreigners when they have all they need in their own hometown. The only other solution? Create a demand right where we are. Now, admittedly, this is easier said than done, and if we were to delve into that, I think that would go way beyond the scope of this video. But simply put, we have to bring back the comic book culture in which stories mattered. This will not be easy. In the age of TikTok and social media crisis that plagues the youth, you want them to pick up a book with pictures and read? Yeah, we're not going to get into that today. While there's a lot to do still, I admire where we've come. The cross-cultural collaborations that I've seen throughout the years have bridged the gap in many ways, more ways than we could have ever imagined. Every time I hear Cowboy Bebop soundtrack or look back at Mappa's animation on Yasuke, it reminds me that we are more alike than we are different. Where do I think the future of Western comic books and anime is heading? Well, there have been a few game-changing comic books and cartoons over the years that I do believe capture what I personally want to see out of the West in the upcoming years. Notable mentions that I believe bridge the gap, and yes, these are anime, depending on whether or not you recognize anime as the Japanese word for an animated cartoon. The Boondocks, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Afro Samurai, Castlevania, Yasuke probably being one of the biggest cross-cultural representations I've seen to date within the art form. Take a look at Radiant, which basically created a new term as Manfra, a French comic book that did receive a reception in Japan, that did get completely animated into what we know today as Japanese-style animation, and the author is straight from France. He's actually completely in a different country, yet has taken this story and put it in this medium and created something that I personally think was great for those reasons. It's no doubt that manga is changing, the medium of comics is changing, and has been for a while now. Change is a defining factor of art, and without it, we wouldn't have come so far in the first place. In retrospect, this video wasn't really about a divide at all. It's merely two sides of the same coin. And this is not nearly all that is to be said about the topic, including the genius of Western comics and what they do get right. But in the meantime, these are some of my thoughts on the matter. And yeah, get out of here. Cut.